Would you like us to sit
It's going well.
Just like the season.
Is it working on the stream? Is that doing anything to the stream?
No, it's fine.
Awesome. All right. We're going to be loud. We're going to be quiet. Welcome. So they can see you. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. I think I know pretty much all of you, but I will introduce myself. I'm Jason Loewith. I'm the artistic director here at Loewith Theater Center. It's a delight to see you. I am also co-director of The Joy That Carries You, which is written by Secka and Dani Stoller. Dani Stoller is in it, and my co-director is Kevin McAllister. Now you know everybody. As you know, these programs that we do behind the scenes are designed for members as a way of providing some context before the show gets really into its run to help deepen your appreciation of the play that you are about to see or have already seen. Have any of you seen the show yet? We've only had a few performances, but you don't count. Staff members don't count. Great. Well, wonderful. Then this is going to be a good conversation for you all. I did not prepare anything because I have been deep over the past 5 weeks and really 2 years with these people on this play. So we are just going to talk, and we're going to begin by saying, where did this play come from, The Joy That Carries You? Dani. Definitely not Kevin. And then we're going to go.
That's fine. Yeah, so pandemic came when I was doing The Humans Here, and Easy Women, my show at Signature,
Which I
wrote, closed early the day that we found out it was our last rehearsal for The Humans. And that COVID was a big deal. And we were just like, and it was like my birthday too. So I was just like, terrible. Anyway, so I went home and ate a lot of cake and cried and all that stuff. And I was like, what am I gonna do with my life? And, in the following weeks and months, specifically following the killing of George Floyd, I think because we had no distractions, because, Tamir Rice and Eric Garner, this was not a new phenomenon of an innocent Black person being slain by authority. But now we had conscious time where it was like, this is what we were going to be sitting with, right? And somehow in that space, I was just like, there's a play here. And because I'm me, I was like, and it's a comedy. And I didn't know what it was exactly, but I thought in my head, this is going to be Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. It's going to be a modern version of it. It's going to be cool hat, by the way. It's going to be, I'm Jewish, so you'll know when you see the play. Anyway, but I was like, it's going to be something like that, but it's going to be an interracial lesbian love story. But what is it? And so I called Awa and I said, hey,
who've you known for how long?
I've known for
at least 10 years.
At least 10 years. And I think somehow we still made
almost
friends while going on a very fraught children's theater tour. Where like everyone else in that tour, I'm like, peace. But Awa and I, we gloop. And
Children's theater tour?
Children's theater tour of a show called Big Nate that was written by Jason and premiered here at Only Theater Center, or started the tour here at Only Theater Center. The tour started here. So I called out, I said, hey, you ever write a play before? And she was like, not a full one. Like, I haven't really written a full one. I was like, cool. Can you like say that you sort of have and you feel cozy with it? Because we've got a meeting with Jason Loewith. We should talk about it. And she was like, great. So we got on the horn with Jason and he said, we told him the pitch. We had not a nary a line written, just this very vague swoop. And he was like, sounds good. Do you like want, like, basically, do you want a slot? And we were like, really? And he said, yes. And in our early conversations, Awa and I, Awa, who you will see tonight, is just an extraordinary, beyond being an extraordinary human and performer, is also an extraordinary writer, and specifically spoken word is just like, it's beyond. And she was like, what if, hear me out, what if this has spoken word weaved through it? And that is how we kind of explore the inner life of our leading character, Alaya, played by Billy Crushon. And I was like, that sounds cool to me. Yeah, let's try it out. And so that's kind of how the play began. And it began with poems that Awa had already written. And we slowly started to realize, okay, well, these actually are gorgeous, but not all of them will fit. In fact, I think almost none of them fit.
None of them are in the play.
None of them are in the play. The play that we had and the play that we have now is, I mean, we've gone through so many different iterations of this play to a point where it was almost over 200 pages at one point, and we were like, okay. And so, yeah, it's just been sort of this. Yeah, so that's how it came to be. It was just Awa and I being like, all right, let's try it out.
Awa, how would you describe what the story was when you began?
Sure.
As opposed to, and then I'm going to ask you, what is the story of the play now?
Sure. So when we started, like Dani was saying, like she had brought up, we were really focused on telling a story of the kind of reverberation that happens in a family, not just when death happens, but when something as tragic as death by authority happens to a young African-American person. And one of the characters all of the characters in the African-American family were dealing with things before this tragedy. So we were exploring how that kind of death affects the inner workings of a family like that. And then also on the other side of that African-American main character, Alaya, being in a relationship with someone who's not African-American, the kind of figuring out of how to share that with somebody that is not so close to you culturally and can't, really maybe understand the depth of how that feels but then also we explored the conversation of that and how somebody who is a non-Black Jew would understand in some way, or whatever that conversation is. And then we found other things that we wanted to talk about, conversations between African-American non-Jews and Ashkenazi Jews about how culturally we do relate, things like that. And we found in our third workshop, we started to fly a lot of flags. We started to want to talk about many, many, many things. So the story was never clear and could never really be focused on one thing, which was a great note I thought that we got. And if I can move on and answer the second question now, we found that the story ended up being less about, well, also let me say, we didn't want to explore tragedy in Blackness in the way that so many plays have explored tragedy in Blackness. We didn't want Black families to come and see this show and feel pain, We didn't want the title to be a lie. So we focused less on that and more on I think the show now focuses more on the healing, on the love, on the joy. Right. Absolutely.
What was the original title before? I can't remember now.
It didn't have a title.
Sure did.
I don't remember.
Before The Joy That Carries You?
It did, because it was after the conversation with Paige, very specifically, there was a director, a singular director before there were two directors, named Paige Hernandez, who has directed here before. She did the Royale for us, you may remember.
I literally don't remember.
We had an incredible conversation with her. If you remember, she was like, I'm really excited about this show, but I have to tell you if I can sort of, please, this is a little bit confidential, but I have a cousin who was just in a violent accident. And the idea of exploring a play about trauma and a play about African-American trauma.
When we as a nation are already going through it.
It's just not something I want to do.
100%.
I want to be living in joy as an artist. I want to be living in, I want to be living in a joyful place and a hopeful place. And I think it was then that you all really took the note of like joy, and that's when you changed the title.
Well, but I don't remember us ever having.
I don't know that we had a title, and then maybe after that conversation.
Maybe.
Yeah, up until that time, it was like a play we wrote.
I'm going to disprove you. I know it's.
No, please do.
Please find it and disprove, because I don't remember. But I also I remember so little. And I think also I've been working ad hoc literary for many theaters during the pandemic, including this wonderful
Which means
theater.
reading plays and reporting
plays.
and saying, do this play. This is amazing. Play.
Right. And so I've been reading all of these plays, and so many of them were about police brutality and the death of young Black men at the hands of police. And the more I was like, oh my God, there's not a single play here that's just like about family that doesn't have this element. And so when Paige brought that up, I was like, well, not only is this supporting her, it's also the fact that this is what we were just seeing a lot of these plays. And it was like, okay, how do we focus on things where terrible things can happen that are not that, and also that we're focused on
the healing of the trauma as opposed to the trauma itself.
And also the micro versus the macro. When you take on something like that, it suddenly becomes a very big play versus looking at something through this one person's beautiful lens. And I think that's kind of what we're doing.
Exactly.
I would agree. Absolutely.
For me as an artistic director and producer, when I choose plays, because so many of us, so many artists want to respond to the politics of the moment and where we are. And so I end up, just like Dani's saying, getting sent plays about global warming, about police brutality, about abortion, about blah, 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 blah. And because at least as well as I know our audience around us, I want to produce plays about people who are dealing with these issues. And it was when Awa and Dani, two artists with whom I have worked repeatedly, pitched the idea of, let's talk about these things, but through the lens of a family play. I thought, and having just seen Dani's play at Signature, I was like, this is going to be something special. So just a quick summary of what the play, of actually what happens in the play.
You were like, I said that.
No, it's okay. Without spoilers. Alaya and Shiri, an African-American woman from Southeast DC and an Ashkenazi Jewish woman from New York City, are in a relationship fairly early, about a year or so into a relationship. And Shiri, Dani plays Shiri, is taking Alaya home for Thanksgiving to meet her parents for the first time. And so that's that guess who's coming to dinner, right? Lesbian, interracial, guess who's coming to dinner. At that Thanksgiving dinner, Alaya receives news, and in the original version of the play, receives news that a family member has been killed by the police. And the difficulty is that Alaya has been estranged because of her sexuality from her family for a decade or more. And it was in the course of the workshop and apropos of the conversation that you're hearing Awa and Dani talk about, that the decision was made that the motivating crisis that makes Alaya have to try to reconcile with her family is not about police brutality. It is, in fact, left a mystery to you all. I want to ask Kevin, Okay, Kevin's, oh, I'm here. Kevin, by the way, Kevin, I think you all know Kevin is our director of curated programming and our BIPOC artist advocate here at Only Theater Center, as well as the artistic director of Artcentric, as well as our assistant directing fellow on Come From Away on Broadway, as well as I'm sure there are other things you haven't told me that you do. So he may be a little tired because he ran a Disney sing-along this morning, that he produced and directed a Disney sing-along this morning here. But can you sort of give me you've talked a lot with us as we've been developing the play about Black representation, African-American representation on stage, and this play is a really, provides a really interesting way to navigate that. How has that journey been for you? Can you talk about how?
Sure. I think when I was approached about coming onto the piece, as you can tell, I was the last piece of this puzzle. The thing that I always lead with is that if it's about Black trauma, first and foremost, I need to understand why it's necessary to tell this story. That's always a big thing for me, because Lord knows I'm tired of playing those characters, so I definitely didn't want to direct those characters. I think there's something that stays with African Americans as artists when we're repeatedly asked to do those kinds of experiences. So I've been a strong advocate across the country about trying to tone that down if we can, or find other ways to look at how people move forward through these kind of experiences. And that's one of the first things that stuck out to me about this piece, was that it was the thing that started bringing everyone together. It was the thing that started everyone healing. It was the thing that started everyone talking. It was the thing that started forgiveness. And that was one of the big things to me, that these African Americans, one, were a loving family, that there were two parents in the household, that there were people who had educations, that there were people who had children, who had jobs, who had dreams of going on and doing better things in life. And that, sad to say, can be a rarity in a lot of what becomes a theatrical African American experience. So once we started working through and we started talking, and Ala and I have worked together several times over the last 7 years, 6, 7 years. So she and I are very close. So I kind of understand the inner workings of her loony mind. And
Beautifully loony.
yes, add beautifully to that. And, and just getting to the core of understanding the story that she wanted to tell. Like, Dani and I have known each other a long time, but artistically, we've never really collaborated on anything. We did a reading once. Yeah, like way back when. But I know Ala, so I was very much like, okay, explain to me what this is.
And I was like,
yeah, and I was like, I don't know what that means. But so once we got into it, and Jason and I started talking about just making sure that the aspect of people representing a large contingency of African Americans who exist in this country that are real and functional and filled with conflict, but are working to resolve themselves, was exciting to me. And so I think you'll see a lot of that tonight, just of how these people start with a huge mountain in front of them and how they all kind of have to work together to get over it. So that's always exciting for me.
Awa mentioned spoken word. How many of you are familiar, when I say spoken word, how many of you are like, oh, I know exactly what that is? Great, so many of you don't, which is exactly fine. All right, it's really crazy. I listen to very old music. I am old, but I listen to older than me music. And I was listening to a bunch of 60s and 70s music on the way up, and Donovan came on. Anybody remember Donovan? Yeah, you guys. Donovan, spoken word. Is kind of a spoken word. You don't even know what I'm talking about.
We're both like,
will you talk to us about spoken word?
sure.
Help us for the spoken word novice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a Webster's dictionary definition, but to me, the way I would explain spoken word to most people is it lies for me somewhere right in between the most like basic poetry that you know is poetry, and rap. Like there's an in between there where spoken word explores rhythm, explores the kind of the passion that rap does in its intensity, but it is as kind of what's a word for like something like a not lilty, but it's
mellifluous?
like it's got a lightness to it too, and
Lyric.
it's somewhere, huh?
Lyric?
Yeah, it is a little lyrical, yes. But yeah, so it's somewhere in between that and most spoken
He's
word.
been in my classes, by the way.
I read.
Oh, all right.
Oh, good, yes. But yeah, so it's somewhere in between music and words, and it's this, I don't know, for a long time I didn't have a word for it. I just knew that I really liked music, but I also really liked poetry and always found a way to put them together. But that is spoken word.
Our dramaturgy, our dramaturgy, thank you, that's great. Our dramaturgy in the program talks a lot about spoken word. Give it a read, you'll hear about how spoken word, the evolution of spoken word in the Harlem Renaissance, how beat poetry, the beats were part of the spoken word, the evolution of spoken word in this country. And nowadays, I mean, I'm sure many of you saw the Biden inauguration, and you probably remember, if anything of it, Amanda Gorman's spoken word performance. That's pure spoken word. That's what we're talking about. It's a combination of poetry and performance that particularly, not solely, but particularly in the African American community, has become a really powerful discipline of self-expression.
Yeah, self-expression and politic and talking to your people and other people. It's something I feel like so many people can identify with.
And you, Kevin, you've brought some spoken word to Only through the through the Only performance series and Only Outdoors. Do you want to talk about why you chose to bring that and what you've been bringing?
Yeah, I think when I came on board, the initial conversation between Jason and I was about expanding the idea of Only Theater Center, and I learned in our conversations that Only Theater Center was actually called Only Theater Center for the Arts, which I did not know. Some of you are nodding your head, so maybe you didn't know. So once I heard that part, I got really excited. I said, oh, so this was built to be more than just plays and musicals. And then, don't get me wrong, I make my living doing a lot of these things, so I love them all. But the idea of where dance was, the idea of where now a huge phenomenon here is drag culture, the idea of where jazz is, or just concerts, or just music in and of itself is enough to invite people who don't want to sit and watch something linear. They don't want to sit in the dark. They want to be able to interact. They want to be able to get up and give something of themselves. They want to have the opportunity to share their truths. And so I started collaborating with a spoken word artist, MC in the area. Her name is Symphony Sherry. And she opened my mind to like 60, 70 artists who are right here in the DC area. Who come from all over, who are national beat poet champions and spoken word legends. I mean, literal people who have just set the standard for this for the last 15, 20 years, who have come in from all over the country to share their poetry. So last summer we started that. We had open mic nights. A lot of the national players got up and shared some stuff. And I think it's just a way to invite individuals to show their truth. It's a way for us to see our differences and all of us to just kind of acknowledge that, oh my God, you have pain, you have family, I have pain. And we sometimes overlook the simple truths that connect us. And I think spoken word gives us a chance to hear in an interesting way, the new ways that people see themselves and more interestingly, the way that we see ourselves through what's being presented. So we'll also be bringing a lot of that back this summer. So that people can get up and share. I think it's important that we as a community, especially now, are learning that we're more connected than we realize, and that opportunities like this, that Only Theater Center for the Arts is creating, I think give us a chance to not only diversify our audiences, but also diversify in who we're reaching and how we're reaching them. Because I feel like sometimes theater gets stuck in the cycle of what works. And we've been reaching the same people over and over. We've been sending the same mailings to the same people over and over again, but it's like no one beyond that circle knows what's going on here. So part of the initiative is just to continually expand. And I think it's working. We had about 75 kids here today who were all singing Encanto and Frozen and Toy Story at the top of their lungs. They were dressed in kids' dresses, running around. It was a great time. But the most important thing to me was that there were South Asians there were Asians, there were Blacks, there was whites, there was older generations bringing their grandchildren, there were stepdads who brought their, this is my week with my son, so I just brought them, and I think that's what we want theater to be. That's what spoken word does. It connects us in a huge way. So, let's just all stay connected. That's really what it really comes down to. Yeah.
As you can see, we are a group of people who really want to divide the culture. So, Awa and Dani, can you two talk about, I mean, you never have written a play together, and though you are both early in your careers as playwrights, Dani, you are a bit of a master of naturalistic comedy. Awa, you're a bit of a master at spoken word, two forms that do not go together. How did the two of you collaborate? What was that collaboration like?
So it was if there were things that it was, first of all, it was great because it was like if one of us knew that the other had an idea. Hey, I've got an idea for this thing. Can I take a whack at scene 12? Absolutely, go crazy. I also had an idea for scene 12. I'm gonna take a whack at it too. Cool. And then we would come back and meet. So there was never any like, we have to do it this way or that way. There was a lot of fluidity in terms of the writing. And the way that we started off with things was just whoever had an idea. And if we had an idea at the same time, we tried to bring our ideas together. But we also absolutely made sure to honor each other in terms of things that were very specific culturally. So if there was something that happened in the scenes with the Jewish family, you know what I mean, that were specific to being Jewish, I would say, what does that mean? And she would be very, very kind in explaining it, and vice versa with the Black family. So we got to learn a lot about each other's cultures and things like that. That was a wonderful part of it. I'm gonna pass it off to you.
I don't think I can say it any better, really. I think you.
But yeah, we both got our hands on everything, which is great. And yeah.
I think something Kevin and I both wanted the two of you to dive into more, and you two dove in a lot, and then we sort of crawled out of the water a little, and then we sort of went back into the shallows on it. This Black-Jewish relations, and that was something very much that very much brought my interest to the table, because that, you know, and this is also part of our dramaturgy, the long history and very complex history of partnership between liberal Jews and African-American civil rights, the African-American civil rights movement, and where that cooperation or lack of cooperation is today is something of real interest to me personally. And that's something that the two of you really dove into from the point of view of how, this is what's so interesting to me, how a liberal Jew finds her identity, is able to keep her faith in an activist culture that is sometimes hostile to it. Talk to us about that, about journeying into that difficult territory.
We honestly, there were days where when we got into the thick of that big conversation, we would be like, okay, I'm gonna go there. This isn't how I feel. I'm just typing it because I know we have to go.
The silent part.
Yeah. I'll let you speak more on that. It's okay if you don't want to.
I don't, but I will. I don't know.
I mean, and you don't have to talk about it.
You know,
I mean, the play speaks. This play
it does
speaks
speak
for
on.
it.
I don't know. I mean, it was actually very much a big thank you to Awa and then Kevin to be like, we have to go there, because I was like, oh, we have to deal with that, and they were like, yes, we do. Because it had been there a little bit. There was a soupçon of that relationship, but we didn't really delve. And then it was Awa and Kevin who were like, you need to go there with it. You know, I think during the past 2 years, I found myself with a lot of other, okay, this is kind of long-winded, but whatever. My social media feed has always been about Bonnie positivity and like Bonnie love and all that kind of stuff, because that's what my other job is. And then little way into the pandemic, as we started to kind of go through this social reckoning, I started to see that there was a lot of anti-Semitism in very liberal spaces, a lot of it. There was really just growing and growing and growing and growing. And it was horrifying. And I found myself looking at all these other Jewish people who would try to like prove that they weren't a bad Jew. They were a cool Jew, you know, all that kind of stuff. And that eventually that doesn't really help. And I began suddenly sharing my experience, and then suddenly it was like meeting all of these other Jewish activists, and not only Ashkenazi or white presenting Jewish activists, but many Jewish activists of color. And that's where my mind was blown, because the rock and the hard place that these people are between, where it's like, choose a culture. You can either be part of activist culture with people that look like you and fight for our rights, but you're going to hear anti-Israel rhetoric, you're going to hear anti-Semitic rhetoric, you're going to hear about how Jewish people are the problem, this Jewish people. Or you can be in Jewish spaces, the majority of which are filled with people who look like me, and there is racism within that, and there's a questioning of your legitimacy as a Jew, and it becomes this thing that was just kind of blowing my mind consistently, and finding myself not sure how to fit into these spaces, because suddenly I was in these spaces and hearing things like, well, you know the kind of Jew I'm talking about. Well, what kind of Jew is that? You know, and it's the kind of mythic Jew. And initially I was really afraid to put that in there, because I was really afraid to claim my own Jewish identity. A lot of what you're seeing on this stage is me, very much me. And I'm indebted to Awa, because Awa was the one who, when I said, you know, I think I'm going to take a class over pandemic. I think I'm going to join this Judaism course online. I think I'm going to start reading the Tanakh with a group. She was like, you got to do it. You have to do it. And then when I was like, I think I'm going to join this Jewish activist thing of like these Jewish activists from Israel and Canada and the US for a book club. She's like, you got to do that too. We got to do that. And so it became this sort of like, I got to discover myself and then put it into our play. And so what initially had been very surface, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. What had originally been very surface because of terror and fear, I was so provided with these three people for a very soft place to land while talking about a very hard topic. And I only hope that I can say that I gave even half of that to my counterpart. But so that is where, I mean, it really did change the course of my life in terms of what I want to do as an artist, the stories I want to tell, the art I want to make, the voices that I want to lift. And that's all thanks to these two gentlemen and to my best friend, Awa.
Would you say, Awa, that in a similar way you are up there with on stage?
Absolutely. I think that there are, without saying too much, there are things that Alaya speaks about and talks about and lives and breathes that I think Awa has not. I think that there is a conversation that goes on with Ma about the depth of knowing one another, and sorry, I lost my mom a few years ago, and I think with Alaya, a lot of the conversation they had, or the conversations that I wish I had with my mom, not in the way that Alaya has the conversations with her mom, but in their depth. You know, I am African American, so my family, I'm first generation Gambian American. So there's a lot that goes on in terms of the household that you just don't share. There's kind of an honor system of like, that's your mom. You don't talk about the deep stuff. You just say, hey, mom, you do what she needs and she does what you need, and that's kind of it. And there's a lot that I wish that I had shared with her, and a lot that I wish that I had learned about her before she passed. So I think in that way, I see myself very much in Alaya. And yeah, I would definitely say also sibling-wise, my brother is Z. My brother is absolutely Z. Brew, who plays who plays Z on stage, reminds me so much of my brother.
That's the character who's Elias.
That's Elias' brother, and he reminds me very much of my brother, someone who will only let out when they need to let out, but otherwise is kind of there as a staple of the family, and is there to help and to move conversation forward and to, yeah. So yes, absolutely.
And your mom is honored on the set.
Yes, she is.
There
There's
are-
a picture of her. Oh,
Never mind,
We already figured that out. We already.
oh my God. Okay, good. Sorry. Oh man.
That's
Blew
okay.
it.
Can I put our production stage manager, Karen Curry, on the spot? Because she's standing
Oh my
right there.
Hi, Karen.
Karen Curry is our production stage manager. She's the one who's with us from before rehearsal starts all through the run, basically making sure that everything Kevin and I say happens every night. No, there's many other things that she does. But you are also production stage manager for AD 16, the other world premiere that we just did earlier this year, and you've certainly done other world premieres. What did you, if you don't mind answering, love to hear any thoughts you have about how this world premiere process has been different, or how it's been the same as other world premiere processes that you've been through.
Okay.
Way better.
I've done this with Dani before, so.
Oh, that's right, and you did Easy Women for
Dani.
Dani.
She did Easy Women.
On Easy Women as well. So, I love new plays. If I could only work on new plays, I would do that. Because I thoroughly enjoy seeing the process, the dramaturgical process that a play goes through as you're putting it on its feet for the first time. That's a little better. I'm far enough away from you guys. The difference in this one, obviously, is 2 playwrights, 2 directors. That's double the number of minds that are involved in making the decisions and having perspectives. And for me, I felt that this process really strongly benefited by having both Kevin and Jason in the room, because their perspectives on the families were very different from each other, but still working towards the same goal and scarily on the same page all the time about what those goals were. So that has been something I've never worked with co-directors before, or co-playwrights. And so, having additional people to help, Jason was working a scene with somebody, I could go to Kevin and say, hey, this is, can we sort of talk about this? New plays are great. I love new plays.
It's an incredible challenge and a fun challenge. We did, you all agreed to do something that I like to do with new plays. Not everybody, I can understand why it's a pain in the ass, but we get new pages. Usually the way it works is the playwrights will give you new pages for the first 3 weeks, almost every day. Like sometimes it'll just be, I changed this one page, sometimes I've changed 10 pages, sometimes I've got this whole scene. And I always prefer that each day is a different color piece of paper for the new pages. So you end up with this rainbow play at the end of like, I mean, there are I don't know if you've noticed, there are like only 10 pages that are still the original.
That is
color.
true.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Of
I actually asked
150.
for a fully white copy simply because I was getting confused in my memory. Print it again.
But I mean, and that's an amazing challenge for challenge for the actors who you go to a certain point and then you say, okay, the text is locked for a period of time to make sure that the actors can actually learn the lines. But still, it's like it changes every day. So I do want to ask before we open it up to questions and other things that you all want to talk about. Kevin, so a lot of you know Kevin is a performer or as a director at Artcentric or elsewhere, or next year with World Goes Round here at Only and Everyman. But you certainly probably know Kevin through musicals, not play.
Mm-hmm.
How did you talk to us about directing a play, which is not the wheelhouse you've chosen for yourself?
I've never been a huge fan of plays. That has changed. I'm gonna go record with that. But I've never been a huge fan of plays because usually when I am interested in going to see a play, I'll look up a video. And the video will always have the same phrase in it. Oh, this play is about humanity. Oh, this play is about a secret. This play is about uncovering and finding something lost. And I'm like, that's every play. So I tend to shy away from, because I'm like, no. But this one was interesting because I was like, I don't know where this is going. And then every time I think I understand where this is going, someone breaks out into spoken word, which is fascinating. Or it doesn't allow you to fall into a certain cadence of things because it's interrupted by the mind. And that's very rare, that you get the internal fighting with the external, or meeting or celebrating the external. And those were the kind of things that brought me on board with this, because I'm not a huge fan of plays. But I do like them sometimes. But I think that ultimately when Jason talked to me about, well, all of them came to me about co-directing, it was very clear to all of them that I speak from a musical language. And you'll see some elements of that in the show. That's
awesome.
Yeah, and there's still elements of musicality and fluidity and things, and acknowledging rhythm and acknowledging heartbeats, and and what that does to the body, and what that does, how that manifests itself through the mind, without becoming full-blown choreography. So which
Next time.
next
Broadway
world
transfer.
goes around, yes. But I think it's important to know that this was a growing process for me as well. Working with Jason was fascinating. His mind is so much faster than mine. And just Jason's energy, but Jason's energy is like, I want you to do this. And I was like, okay, great, that's fine. And then him and Dani, with their energy, and it's just, and I'm sitting there like, these synapses are firing, and I'm just sitting over there like, Karen, what's happening? But
I think you and I are kind of similar creatures.
yes, it's exciting to watch their powers combined. But I think overall that I got on board with this because I could find the musical through line through this. I think I could feel that there was a song and there was a dance that was fighting to be explored. And that was kind of what excited me. Like if they had come to me with, Our Town, I'd be like, you don't really need me for
STC's
this.
already
Yeah,
doing it.
you know what I mean? But those aren't, I have specific languages that I know I speak well, and making sure that I can find a sense of musicality and heart in everything I do is important. And I don't want to touch anything that doesn't allow me to at least put huge displays of heart in front of an audience. Yeah.
I would just say for me, I mean, one of the things that I've learned from you, and this is, it's such an, directors never work with other directors, right? Actors are always working and learning from other actors. I never, as a director, unless I'm assisting somebody, have an opportunity to see another director doing the work that they do. So I always, it's an incredibly great learning experience. It was a great learning experience to be alongside you and watch the way you work and the vocabulary you use, especially because, as Karen was saying, we were both very much going through the same place, but the vocabulary you were using, the vocabulary I was using with the actors was different, and that was really exciting for me to see. And I come from a non-music, even though I've not directed musicals, I come from a new plays or classic plays background, and you come from a musical background, and I think the way you talk to actors to get to the heart of a scene and to get to the point that hopefully they cry on stage or you cry out in the audience is different, often different vocabulary. And the two of you have, I mean, worked both in musical. You've certainly worked a lot between musicals and straight plays. You've been more musical.
More
Yeah,
musicals
no.
with some straight plays,
Yeah. So, it's
She kills it every time.
I want to sort of open this up to if you have any other things to ask or say, and also questions that this esteemed group of people might have to ask. Phil, you are esteemed. Yes, Gary.
Yeah, well, you just alluded to it, as Karen did. I'm curious to know how two directors direct one play at the same time. And if there were any, neither of you have done that before, right? And were there any conflicts or disagreements? And don't lie to me, because Dani will tell me later.
That's right.
Hey, Gary. No, there's not. I don't think we had any disagreements per se. I think in the room, like he said, we learn the way the other one works through time and space. And anytime you take on a group of actors who are also directors, who are also established leaders and great performers in the area, everyone's going to come to the room with ideas. And I think the smartest director I've ever known is always going to be the one that's going to be open to acknowledging that maybe the best idea lies within these actors. Maybe they'll know these characters better than I do. Maybe they'll offer a solution that sparks me to thinking about something. And I think we had a great team with all of us, as well as with the entire cast. I mean, they're very specific. They ask very specific questions. And working with Jason,
Sometimes too specific.
sometimes too long of a question. But Jason and I met a lot, and we divvied up the work before we actually went into the space, so that he and I had a clear plan. I feel like this scene makes sense to me, so I'll take this. I'll take that. If you don't mind, great. This scene, I don't know what's happening. And Jason's like, I don't know what's happening either. Okay, great. So we'll figure this one out together. And I'm sure there were things that I initially did that Jason was like, okay, let me see where this is going, and then he would, after we finish it, he would say, okay, great, I like that. What if we add this? What if we add that? Sure, yeah, good. I'm never too proud to say, hey, this is gonna be better, And I think he allowed me certain privileges in that regard as well, being like, yeah, this is great. I think what's missing is this. I think we can probably look at that. Great, you wanna take it today? And we traded off on scenes, kind of like what they did, is that once someone had laid the sure foundation, the actors knew, Jason would say, okay, I got a couple meetings. Can you take this scene that I worked on today? And vice versa. And so I think what you'll see is a very good collaboration. I mean, I didn't leave the experience with like huge negatives. I don't come away from this feeling like I would never work with them, but I think we were open. And I think knowing that I'm trying some things, and if you think you've got a better way to do it, I respect you enough to be like, try it. It's a great thing, because you don't always get that. And you don't always get that with actors. You're like, well, actually, I feel. And then you have to say, well, as your director, but we didn't have that problem here. Like I said, it's a room full of collaborators.
There was a lot of humility all across the board.
Yeah.
I think that's what made it work. And I'm looking at Jason King-Jones, who I actually have co-directed with, our senior associate artistic director. And I am going to say that was a harder co-directing situation for many reasons, having nothing to do with us. But part of it was, I remember we co-directed Midsummer Night's Dream for the National Players Tour, 69, 68, something. So back many years ago. And part of what made it tough was I came in with a big chip on my shoulder, like, I know Shakespeare. You're not going to teach me. And I was like, discovered very quickly, like, I have no idea how to stage a comic scene in a Shakespeare play. And Jason is like, well, I did study this and have directed some 85 Shakespeare plays. Why don't I tell you the 10 ways that scene will work, because the one way you're doing it won't. So
He knows every word of that point.
But anyway, I do.
Yeah, but we had new pages every day, so it was never we could really lock anything and say this is how it's going to be. We would run things, and they would come away with new thoughts from that experience. Or we run things, the actors would come away with new things. Or we run it, and one of us would come away with something new. So, and then we fall in love with something, and then you go away and come back, and 2 days later that page is gone. So it was really just a constant wheel that we were on, of just making sure that we were appreciating whatever we had in front of us at any given time.
Yeah, see, just before we go to Phil, I think actually the best example of how this was such an egoless collaboration, which is so unusual for our business, was after the dress rehearsal. Jason King-Jones sat us down and gave us notes, and he had an idea about the final moment of the play that both of us were like, well, that's a great idea. I said to Kevin, like, can I take a stab in putting that on stage? We went to put it on stage. I was like, I think this is what's going to happen. And Billy Cushawn, who plays Laia, was like, oh, can I try this instead? This would be more interesting. And I was like, there it is. And so, like, the four of us created that moment of the end of the play. So anyway, Phil.
When you mentioned how many candidates you described the various colors as the circles changing, what does that do to the actor?
What does it do? I mean,
Well, you were an actor and a playwright. What would you say?
Well, it's an interesting balance, isn't it? Because so a lot of the changes that we made were shifted because of these three people to my right, specifically the two gentlemen in the center being like, maybe not that, or like, here's a question, or something like that. So a lot of the huge shifts that we made were sparked by either things we saw in the room or questions that were asked. And then Alma and I would get together and it would be like, oh, it's 4 a.m., time to work. I think what was a really weird thing about performing in the piece and also having written it is that, you know, when actors get new pages, they're kind of, there's generally like a, oh God, like more stuff. This is more da-da-da-da. And I'm like, I understand that feeling, but also being like, but be excited because this makes the show better. So I think now I have learned that I will never be upset by new pages because I now realize the like immense growth that came through it. But there is still that like, oh Jesus, you know, because we were getting cuts up until yesterday. Yesterday was the first time we performed the show that you will now see. And what's even wackier about it is that Awa and I are still like, cool. So for our next time, you know, because there was that sort of thing where the agency that I am with was awesomely working with both of us. And we were like, hey, before you like send it out, like, we need another workshop thing because we have more stuff we want to do. We have more things we want to try. Some of which I think is just our own Michigas. But I think that sometimes to the actors at first, it's like, oh my God, all this new, but then it's like, but it's necessary. Like we've never done cuts or changes just because we were like, whatever, I'm bored. It's because this is a super necessary thing. And I think if anything, you know, if a play is a lump of clay, every time we cut and change, something forms. And last night it was like, this is the show. So.
Except for that line of yours that you switched to.
I did switch a line and I have never seen other people laugh at me so hard when I got off stage. Whoopsie doopsie.
Is that how?
Yeah, so we're talking about changes and all this, and I'd like to know if you're developing the script in the early parts, with whom or did you seek other advice outside, or do all the changes come from the two of you, or did you have somebody else read it, people that, you know, that
So before you answer, thank you, Hal. We didn't quite say, so after they brought the idea to us, we did a Zoom workshop in November of 2020 with, we hired actors, Only Theater hired actors and a director and a dramaturg, an outside dramaturg. We did another in-person workshop with the same group of people or almost the same group of people. No, the same group of people in June of 2021 in person. And then we did another Zoom reading in November, and that was when we had some different people. Mm-hmm. So between the idea coming to Only and the first rehearsal, there was a 2-day period, there was a 6-day period, and then a 1-day period. So there was a lot of that.
Yeah. Now, I will say, not every single idea was born of our minds. Jason, Kevin, other folks that we had in the workshops that we did brought up really good points in the midst of our tweaking that kind of laid lasting changes that still exist in the play now. So I would say that like but a good amount of our ideas were born of the conversations that we had in the room. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe last couple questions? Yeah, 1, 2. Yes, sir.
All right, so you want to see more Black people come to the theater, see plays like this, correct?
Well, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look around the room. This is what I've been going here, Jason, what, 30 years, 35 years? And this is the audience I see. Old white people.
Speak for yourself.
I think that's, it's definitely, I mean, I think that's part of our, that is our huge challenge. I also think even earlier this week, you would have been surprised at the way it's not looking like, it hasn't looked like this.
Yeah, last night especially.
And then
I want to call out, yes, Shruti, our Director of Community Engagement, has a lot to do with that. And Shruti, you want to say something?
So I just wanted to add that this conversation is
it's like first goes to the members and there is a ticket to the opening night, but the next week's panel discussion is free to all patrons who buy a ticket to watch that night's show. So that might be the other reason you're seeing this crowd here today. But in general, the way we're planning all the ancillary events, actually, the other thing I wanted to add was that simply, I call her simply Sherry from by habit, but Sherry will be running a spoken word workshop on June 4th, and there will be community sharing at that event. And we're also partnering with the Sandy Springs Slave Museum. They're going to bring, they've been doing local history hours, so we're finding different ways to actually connect deeply with our immediate community, just outside of Holiday Theater on Brook Road and the Shaftesbury Church and different places right here who are now feeling very welcome to come in and be a part of this.
Right, and I also think just to I'm right there with you, but I also think there's a long-term goal that we have to acknowledge that it's going to take a while before people who have never felt welcome in spaces are going to feel like anything that's on stage speaks to me. I think there has been a huge history of just Raisin in the Sun, and then anything August Wilson, and that's kind of it that most theaters put on, and most times you'll find those in the month of February because it's Black History Month. But I think it's one of those things where we've been talking a lot in our artistic staff and just our senior staff about how do we diversify the stories we're telling, and then first we've got to start with creating new stories.
Yeah.
Right? And then we've got to start with finding stories that people of other cultures can acknowledge, and then working with our community
in different ways of telling stories, like the kind of work that we do.
to figure out how, because a lot of people come here, especially for the curated programs, who have never been here. When I started the drag thing last year, we had maybe 100 people at each one of those shows. We did one 2 weeks ago, and there were about 400 people here, and all ages, colors, creeds, genders. It was, people came in drag. There were teenagers who were just with their parents, who were fully out, and they were like, I've never been here. I'm so excited to be here, And so I think it's just that we have to start here inside first, and I think eventually it'll just start to spill out. But there's no point in doing another production of Raisin in the Sun if it's the only time that's going to happen.
Yeah, when I saw August Wilson here, it was this audience.
Yeah.
There are no books.
That was the first time, and that was Piano Lesson, 2014. That was the first time Only Theater Center had done an August Wilson play. It was long after he was dead. It was a sort of a shonda, as one might say. I think in some ways Only has been behind, but I also, it's a great conversation, and we don't have time to have the rest of it, but you and I can, we type all the time. I want to give you one.
Take my mask off to ask a question, which
Please.
is so old now, because the question had been, when, as writers, did you know you were finished? That was the old question.
Oh gosh,
So
we
now the
don't.
new question is, finished with your play?
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The new question is, would plays still get I'm old fashioned really, but do you ever copyright so that eventually it'll be repeated?
Yeah, that's an interesting, do you want to?
No,
It's intellectual property, right? So they don't get copywritten, they get published. So now that we've had this right here, this is technically the way the copyright works. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not like an idea, it's an intellectual property. So because of that, we have people now who manage our work, who manage this work, who make sure, so anybody who wants to do it has to go and get the rights from the people who manage the work.
And will it be the same?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because if Awa and I felt completely done with it, then yes. So I have plays that when they are taken and they are done, they are the plays that I finished and was like, you go ahead and have fun. This one, I think Awa and I both are on the same page of wanting another strike at another workshop sort of element where we have another 3-week rehearsal period where we can still make shifts.
Okay, and for the novice, what is the work? Well, I'm lost, but I
Oh,
really
yeah, I know, we love
like that the question started there to get robust.
Yeah.
So the workshop is part of the process of writing at the same time the play is being performed.
No, the workshop usually happens before the rehearsal process for the performance. But the workshopping of the play does happen during the rehearsal, but not during the performance.
So essentially, we hire people to just come in and read something they've never seen before. And we spend like a week or 2 or 3 with them
That's
just talking about it. What works, what doesn't. This line feels weird. Now that you hear it from A to Z, does the story make sense? Are these characters in line with where they start at the beginning of the show, at the end? And so it's a way for directors, writers, actors to kind of start crafting a more specific narrative. And so by the end of that week, most times the writers come away with like, we've got a list of things that we know we can now go work on. And then with new works, there's always a little bit of extra time carved out because in rehearsal process, where usually there's like a 3-week, I think is what they do. You make it a 4th week because you know there's going to be at least quite a few hours of changes.
And this was, I believe we were supported by the Edgerton, no, not by the Edgerton, it was something different.
Well, this was the Vanguard Arts.
But this is Vanguard Arts, yeah. It's like a rehearsal period without performance at the end.
Interesting, very fascinating, because I
Thank
know
you.
I've never understood that. If I'm correct, the August Wilson plays are locked.
Yes.
Correct.
Every word, it's locked.
Yes.
And that, you know, kind of saved what he wanted to say.
Mhm.
So I guess, are you worried that someone else could take it?
No, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, nobody can take it.
Especially, we have like so many drafts at this point that if anyone tried to take anything, if someone tried to take the word "that" and put it in their play,
We'd be like,
Once
no.
you-
that's ours.
You know, the days when you actually had to send a copy of a play to the Library of Congress to get a copyright are long gone. Now you finish a play and you type the words and you have it at home, it's copywritten automatically, right? It's just up to you to prove, should somebody try to steal your work.
That this was mine
That it was
first.
yours. We are out of time. We're past time and we need to get the stage to. We're running to dinner with these, but can we do it after?